Hey, it's Sela Social Studies.
Hey guys, welcome back to Seal of Social Studies. All right, so you remember we ended the civil rights movement, and I had said that it's really the Vietnam War that kind of ends the civil rights movement because of all the government funding and everything like that gets transferred from the Great Society into the Vietnam War. Well, we have a couple of things that happened during the civil rights movement that we're going to cover right now, and it has to do with communism and it has to do with Cuba, the Bay of Pigs invasion, Fidel Castro, and the Cuban Missile Crisis. So before Kennedy was assassinated in 1963, you remember that he was doing things to try to contain or stop the spread of communism around the world. If you remember, part of his new frontier was cutting taxes, supporting the military, funding a stronger military, expanding the nuclear weapons. Remember that arms race between the United States and the Soviet Union? Who can build more nuclear weapons? Well, Kennedy is funding that, okay? A couple of things that he does to try to contain the spread of communism: the Alliance of Progress program. This gives $20 billion to Latin American countries to be like, hey guys, if the Soviet Union tries to come in here and push communism on you, remember who gave you this money to help fund your countries. Kennedy also creates the Peace Corps in 1961, which sent volunteers to struggling third world developing countries and helped them do things like build schools and dig water wells for the people there to drink. This was all done to try to contain communism. He's telling these countries, if communist offerings come your way, don't accept them. Remember the United States. Remember the democratic United States, the ones who are sending you this money to help you, sending you these people to help you. All right? All in attempts to contain communism, stop it from spreading. However, it winds up spreading to a couple of places, right? Remember the Potsdam Conference, where Berlin and Germany is divided into four, with four of the main allies getting a chunk of Germany and Berlin. You have France, Britain, United States, and the Soviet Union, the Communist Soviet Union. Well, after the Potsdam Conference, you have a lot of East Germans who don't want to live in a communist state. So they flee in mass numbers to the western part of Berlin, West Berlin, the capitalistic, democratic West Berlin. We call this the brain drain. And we call it the brain drain because it wasn't just regular citizens who were fleeing from East to West Berlin. You're talking about doctors, lawyers, chemists, scientists, I mean, really smart people leaving East Berlin to West Berlin. Well, Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev is mad that this is happening. He's like, why do you keep leaving my area? I mean, communism is like so sweet. I don't know why you're going to leave. So he demands that there be a border put up between East and West Berlin. And if people don't stop fleeing and the United States doesn't stop letting people in, they're going to go to war. So the first step of trying to avoid this war is the building of what we call the Berlin Wall. And in August 1961, East Germany starts building this wall. It's about 10 to 12 foot high. It has barbed wire across the top. It's like a jail. I mean, can it be any more like this Iron Curtain that Winston Churchill said? I mean, it's a huge concrete barrier between Soviet East Berlin and democratic West Berlin. This wall only took 2 weeks to build, and the Berlin Wall becomes the symbol of the Cold War. When Reagan becomes president and communism is ending, Reagan famously tells Soviet Premier Gorbachev, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall, talking about the Berlin Wall. That was the epitome or the symbol, the metaphorical symbol of the division of Soviet communism, Western democracy, and the Cold War. So it spreads into Germany, right? Remember we said that communism spread across East Europe. One other place that it spreads to is Cuba. And we have something, this screen talks about the Bay of Pigs invasion. In 1959, Fidel Castro overthrows the Cuban government and puts in a communist government in Cuba. Well, Cuba's only 90 miles off of the United States. So people are like, oh my gosh, we have communism so close to America. Now that's got to be bad. Domino theory, click, 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 click. All these countries fall to communism. Who's next? Is it going to be Mexico? Is it going to be any of those other islands out there? Are we going to be surrounded by communist countries? So America's worried about it. Kennedy approves a operation via the Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA, to go into Cuba secretly and remove Castro from power. Well, about 1,500 Cuban exiles land in what we call the Bay of Pigs. It's on that map right there. And they go in there to invade and remove Castro, the CIA, these Cuban exiles in April 1961, and it's a failure. It's a huge failure. These guys get caught, they get killed, they get arrested, thrown in jail. I mean, it's terrible. And this is one of the big stains on Kennedy's presidency, this Bay of Pigs invasion. He faces harsh criticism until the day he dies about this failure. How could you do that? This secretive operation, going in there to try to remove them. How can the United States government, one of the superpowers of this world, can't go into this country and remove one little dictator, communist dictator? It's crazy. So the Bay of Pigs invasion, attempt to remove Castro, is an epic failure. When the United States starts flying their spy planes over Cuba a year later in October of 1962, we start seeing the Soviet Union installing nuclear warheads in Cuba. This is what we call the Cuban Missile Crisis. It's not the Cubans with missiles, it's the Soviet Union putting missiles into Cuba 90 miles off the coast of the United States. If these missiles were launched, they would reach any city, anywhere in the United States within a matter of minutes. So Kennedy's like, nope, ain't happening. Let's get those missiles out. So we can't go into Cuba because we already tried that and we failed. We can't go to the Soviet Union and be like, hey, stop sending your missiles. So what is like a non-wartime act that we could kind of do, but not really just start firing at each other? And what Kennedy does to solve the Cuban Missile Crisis is he puts a naval blockade around Cuba. If you can't get to Cuba to deliver missiles, well then, there's going to be no more missiles there. So the Soviets come into Cuba with these missiles. They see that we're blockading Cuba. They know they can't go in. They turn around and get sent back to the Soviet Union. And now it's like, what are we going to do? So Khrushchev and Kennedy get on the phone. It says right there, they set up a telephone hotline so they could talk directly to each other. It's a red phone. You pick it up and it rings directly. Hello, remove the missiles. No, I'm not. What are we going to do? I mean, it's right then and there. This is how close we were to going to war and pretty much destroying planet Earth. So ultimately, they come to an agreement that ends the Cuban Missile Crisis. The Soviets agree to remove the missiles from Cuba. And in return, Kennedy says, all right, we're not going to invade Cuba to get rid of Fidel Castro, and we'll remove some of those missiles that we put in Turkey and Italy, which are right outside, communist Soviet Union. So they finally get this settled, and the U.S. and the Soviets signed a limited nuclear treaty ban, which limits the testing of nuclear weapons above ground. That was always like a show of force. Well, look at our hydrogen bombs. They're so much better than regular atomic bombs. Oh, look at this. Oh, look at that. So we're not gonna try these. We're not going to test these nuclear weapons above ground anymore. We're going to do it all underground. Right there, you see a picture of Kennedy and Khrushchev sitting on nuclear warheads. You can't see it because it's very close, but they each have their finger like above a button that's just going to launch it. So here are some pictures of Cuba. This is the type of pictures that were taken. They're very blurry. You have to remember these things were taken in the 1960s. So you have here, they saw that there was missiles in Cuba. Here's a runway for it. Here's a missile silo launching trucks that brought it there. Here's a nuclear warhead getting paraded around the Soviet Union. And here's one getting ready to launch. So these are the type of pictures. Now look, we have here Soviet missile installation. So we were able to figure out what all these nuclear warheads were in Cuba. So these are the type of things that Americans were scared of during Kennedy's administration and the spread of communism. So we're going to get off of the spread of communism, and we're going to, well, not really, but we're going to go into what we call the space race. In the 1960s, we have that space race, the competition of the United States and the Soviet Union to go explore space. We're trying to be number one. We're trying to be the lone superpower in the world. So we're going to try to outbuild each other in nuclear weapons. We're going to try to do each other by going into space. We're going to try to be the first to the moon. Well, think about this now. In April 1961, the Soviets send Yuri Gagarin as the first person in space. So the Russians beat us into space. They also beat us with Sputnik, the first Soviet satellite got sent into space. So the Soviet Union beats the United States to space. You can see the next month, Alan Shepard Jr. becomes the first U.S. astronaut in space. In 1962, John Glenn becomes the first American to orbit or go all the way around the Earth. And in 1961, Kennedy says, we are going to be the first to the moon. Congress approves NASA. They provide them with billions of dollars of funding, and they began work on the Apollo project. As you can see there, 8 years later, unfortunately, Kennedy's dead. American astronauts Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin become the first people to walk on the moon. So meanwhile, the Soviets beat us to space with Sputnik. They beat us to space with Yuri Gagarin. The United States was actually the first country and the only country to date to still walk on the moon. That's why you have a lot of conspiracy theories out there. A lot of people think the United States faked the moon landing. Well, why? Because we were the only people to land there.